This is Frankly Speaking by Friends of Europe, an independent think tank with a difference. Frankly Speaking is your go-to on all things peace, security and defense. Original content, original thought.
On the 7th of October, Hamas launched an attack on Israel. At the time of this recording, the death toll has reached 1,400 in Israel, and more than 2,900 lives were lost in Gaza. Saturday's events and everything that has been happening since cannot be understood in a vacuum. This is a conflict that has been simmering since after World War II, when Israel was declared a state. Many actors have tried to establish peace in the region, but peace was never achieved between Israel and Palestine. I am Catarina Vila Nova, host of Frankly Speaking, and joining me today is Anchal Vohra, previous correspondent for Al Jazeera and reported for several media organizations in the Middle East. Anchal was previously based in Beirut and Delhi and is now a Brussels-based columnist at Foreign Policy and recently started writing for Politico. Anchal, welcome and thank you for joining me today.
Thank you very much for asking me to come. I think at the outset it's important that I state, because this is such a divisive issue, I just want to be clear that my personal position is that I condemn the attack, and I think there's no justification for it. And I don't think the fact that the Israeli-Palestinian conflict has not been resolved can justify the brutality of Hamas's attack on Israel and its citizens.
This is considered the most ambitious operation that Hamas has ever launched from Gaza, and the most serious cross-border attack Israel has faced in more than a generation. Israeli intelligence is already being accused of a massive failure. What assessment do you make of the conditions that made this attack possible, both from Israeli and the Hamas side?
I think as far as the Israelis are concerned, I think they were perhaps just not looking at the right place. My personal assessment, I think, is that they were looking more towards the northern border. They were looking more towards Hezbollah and Lebanon. They were thinking that maybe a similar an attack of that magnitude, I'm not sure, but an attack will likely come from that front and not from Hamas. I think they weren't looking, and that may have been a mistake, and that's a mistake that Netanyahu will have to answer for, depending on how this conflict goes and however long it goes on for. On the Hamas's side, I think it's over the years we've seen increased support from Iran. We've seen increased coordination with Iran and Hezbollah. And I've lived in Beirut, and I can tell you that Hezbollah is a very disciplined organization. It's also highly trained, highly ideological. And there's enough open source material out there that says that there has been significant help given from Iran and Hezbollah to Hamas. Hamas's leaders are currently, several of them in Qatar, but also in Lebanon. So I think that support has been given. There is no clarity of an immediate trigger, but I think that has played a role. And I think the fact that Israel and Saudi Arabia were trying to normalize relations has also added to concerns, could have added to concerns. I think they did, among Hamas leadership, that if Saudi Arabia normalizes ties with Israel, that means the Islamic world has, or at least the Sunni Islamic world has, and that could have been a factor. I think it could have been a factor that rattled Hamas's leadership, and they chose this particular timing.
And how do you see this conflict developing and expanding beyond the borders to the region?
I think it's very difficult to say at the moment. Of course, it's a very, very tense atmosphere. There are several fronts that could open. Iran's foreign minister has already said that if the situation continues to escalate in Gaza, then he won't rule out other fronts opening. Of course, it could escalate, Israel's northern border and Lebanon's southern border. In southern Lebanon, that's one front. That's the most tense right now. It could also escalate in southern Syria. It could be a case that other Iranian proxies and militias in different parts of the Middle East start to attack Israel or its allies. So there could be several fronts. Whether it will become a multiple front war or not, we hope not. We don't know yet. But certainly at the moment, it's quite tense, especially in Lebanon.
European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen has argued for Israel's right to self-defense, saying that the European Union stands with Israel. This was not a position well received by many within Europe. with some accusing it of being one-sided. Do you see these cracks that are starting to show within Europe across member states a reflection of the divisiveness that this conflict has created?
To a certain extent, yes. I mean, your friends are divided, and I have friends in Lebanon, in Israel, in America, on all sides, and I can already see, their social media feed and see how divisive this issue is. And it's possible, but I don't necessarily blame von der Leyen for siding with Israel because of the images that have come out from there and the barbarity of that attack. For at a human level, to support Israel, I do think that as a diplomat of that stature, though, you've got to sort of manage the message you're sending out in a way that you don't seem to be, of course, supporting Hamas, but also not excluding the Palestinian people. And I think that should have been, that EU's message could have been a bit more inclusive a little bit earlier, if not the first few days.
So you feel like that's a balance that the European Union, in the figure of Ursula von der Leyen, has not been struck?
I don't know if I think they managed it. I think they damaged control in a sense, because, and I'm not saying that in the context of von der Leyen. I'm saying that in the context of trying to. There were reports that they're going to stop aid, and then they retracted that and said that they won't stop aid. And I think it's important to to distinguish Hamas from Palestinian people. Of course, the Hamas leaders and militants are Palestinians, but that does not say that all Palestinians back their thinking all the way. There are many layers here, so there has to sort of, that distinction should have been brought out, because we don't want sort of, what I fear is that there are two narratives here. One is that Israel is somehow justified in dropping 6,000 bombs in a week on Gaza because of the barbarity of Hamas's attack, but these bombs are falling on Palestinian people. I think that narrative is not justified, just as much as saying that because the conflict has not been resolved, Hamas was justified in killing Israelis and abducting Israeli kids and grandmothers. That's not justified either.
And how do you see that this attack by Hamas on Saturday influenced the public perception of the Palestinian cause?
I think it has harmed it. I think that Palestinians for a very long time have had a moral high ground in this conflict with the Israelis. And in a sense, they've had a moral high ground because they've been the underdog fighting a military giant. And they've been sort of, asking for, at least, for our generation. And now Hamas's attack is kind of painting all Palestinians in a way, or at least to some, as Hamas, which I don't think is correct. And I think it's damaged the Palestinian cause quite significantly, because sympathy has tilted towards Israel. And I can understand why it has tilted towards Israel. You've got to take a step back and see that, Palestinians are worthy of all the sympathy as well. But at the moment, you can't think of that because of what Hamas has done.
President Biden also expressed U.S. support for Israel. At the same time, shortly after the attacks, the Palestinian president was indicated that he will visit Moscow. Do you see this conflict turning into a proxy war by the United States and Russia?
I don't know if it will turn into a proxy war by the U.S. I think the U.S. has been a major player in that conflict for a very long time, and the only one that really counts. And I think there's a whole lot of talk over who could be, whether Russia and China can actually enter that theater. And can they already, China has spoken against Israel's attack in Gaza, and Russia has also backed, is sounding more and more like backing the Palestinians here. But over the years, they've also cultivated relationships with Israel. So there's more to this. Is it possible that China does what it did in Saudi Arabia and Iran and became the mediator and became, I'm going to bring about peace? It is, hypothetically speaking. Theoretically, it's possible, but I don't see that happening right now. I think America is far too relevant, and it's going to sort of be the major player there and the only one that really counts. And Russia and China may try, but I don't think they're going to get much space anytime soon.
So do you see this condemnation by China of Israel's retaliation as a natural reaction keeping in mind that Russia and China have been have been getting closer with their ties, and as well keeping in mind that China has also been trying to strengthen their relationship with non-Western countries.
I mean, this is certainly bloc competition. There is such certainly global power competition at play here, because as we can see already with the Ukraine conflict, that Iran has tilted completely towards. I mean, it was never, it's always been in a different sphere of influence, but it's leaned more towards Russia and China. Yeah, China has invited Iran to be a member of BRICS, and Iran has been helping Russia with drones. These are very, very major developments that have taken Iran to the other side more than the Western countries would be comfortable with. That has already happened, and now you certainly have these blocks forming in a much more stronger or clearer fashion, where you either have a US EU bloc, and then in the other side you've got this Russia, China, Iran bloc. So it could be, it's possible that it expands, but I think we're in uncharted territory here. I think and it's too soon to say. I think we've got to wait. Primarily, the reason I say that is because the politics of the Middle East, and at least Israel and Palestine, is so deeply embedded with the American foreign policy that I would find it very difficult to believe that America is not going to be a player.
Mm-hmm. But so for now, you don't see that Russia and China entering the conflict, even though just in terms of rhetoric, will be a decisive factor in how the conflict will play out?
I don't think they'll enter the conflict. I mean, I don't think how do you mean, like militarily or politically? They already seem to be backing.
Yes, for now it's just been in terms of rhetoric, of criticizing. Do you see, but yes, moving forward, do you see they will explicitly provide military aid, weapons supply, etc.?
I think it's really too early to say. It's really too early to say. What we do know is that there is already that sort of military cooperation between Iran and Russia is already there, and Iran has helped Hamas in the past. So there is that access already there. We don't know how big this is going to be, and whether, because what you're saying sort of sounds a lot bigger than even a regional conflict, because that becomes a global conflict. So I think maybe we can wait a bit longer to discuss that, in my view.
And domestically, what effect do you think these events will have on Benjamin Netanyahu's government? Do you think we'll be able to rally the support of his people against the one common enemy, or do you think these events will be what the decisive factor to topple his government?
I think right now the people will rally behind the government, because the people are traumatized. This is the worst attack that has happened, not just on people of Israel, but I can't think of a worse attack that's happened anywhere, frankly. With mothers and grandmothers and babies are abducted. There are fathers sitting in their homes and they're unable to get to their families. Yeah, so it's quite serious. So I think for now, both Israeli opposition, the military, the government, they're all one thing. And I think they've got an aim in mind, and they're together on it, that they want to go in and eliminate Hamas. I think the difference of opinion right now is, and a few really, but fewer voices calling for measured response, but still there are voices calling for measured response in Gaza. Voices in Israel calling for measured response in Gaza. And for now, I think they have a goal in mind, that they want to decapitate Hamas. They want to decimate its capabilities, military and political. But as this conflict develops and finally, whatever final shape and form it takes, that's when we know whether Netanyahu has managed to emerge as a still preferred leader, or is he going to be taken to task for such a huge catastrophe, because this attack has happened on his watch. So I think it depends on how and what happens to this conflict in the end that will decide Netanyahu's fate.
As we know, this is a conflict that has been dragging for decades now. Do you see that we have arrived at this position now because of failed diplomacy and foreign policy?
I think it depends on how you describe this situation or this position. I think if you mean, has Hamas's attack happened because diplomacy failed? No. I think the kind of barbarity they've displayed, they would have, that has nothing to do with, that is so specific, and the attack was so barbaric, it has, and I want to be very clear, that has nothing to do with the conflict failing.
Not to the specific attack, but the fact that peace has never been really brokered between the two parties.
The general situation that we're in, the general situation of conflict or the absence of peace or the absence of resolution, which keeps these two people, in this atmosphere of hate and anger. This is certainly because the conflict has not been resolved, and it should be taken seriously by all actors, including the Palestinians, but most definitely the Israelis. Netanyahu's government is the most far-right government, I think, ever in Israel, and that is quite dangerous. And they have not been forthcoming when it comes to peace talks, and they've been, wanting to do even less than previous administrations perhaps have. That's dangerous. But also, for the US, in the sense, the idea that you can have Israel make peace with Arab neighbors in the form of Abraham Accords. In 2020, Israel signed peace with the UAE, with the Bahrain, Morocco. And now the talks were going on with Saudi. I think that doesn't resolve the conflict. So as long as the aspirations of Palestinian people are not taken into account, as long as there is not a resolution that's not broadly just, there has to be a lot of pragmatism involved in any peace solution you come to. And both sides will have to concede, both sides will have to give in. Neither side is going to have everything they want. But as long as you don't have that, and as long as the world is not pushing you to actually form peace, and in that sense it is a failure of primarily American foreign policy, then you can't, it's always going to be unrest, it's always going to be tense. And then, you have really unhappy people and a lot of sadness, a whole lot of sadness. Every time I've been there, I've just felt so much anger and hate and sadness.
And what hope remains for peace now? And who do you see could be an honest mediator in this conflict? We spoke about different actors, different countries. We didn't mention the United Nations, of course, but for example, could they be considered a mediator in this conflict?
I think the problem with the UN always is that it sort of has no teeth. So, the UN always is, and then there are allegations against, is UN controlled by this country or that country? And it doesn't have any teeth. It doesn't sort of come through. Could it be, could China, maybe China would want to do that. Yeah, I don't know whether it will. Could it be, I still think that the Americans have more say in these affairs. Under Trump, they were not an honest broker because of Trump's excessive ideas. His vision was a bit too far pro-Israel in the sense that he didn't want to concede anything for Palestinians. So that didn't work. America was not an honest broker. But is it now? I think it possibly could be, and because of its influence already, maybe it will be in the end the only one. Or could it be, a Scandinavian country? Could it be a Norway? Could it be a country that has nothing to do and has with the conflict but has enough credibility? Could it be the EU? I think these are all open ideas, right? And yes, it could be someone else, but I constantly fear that because, I don't fear, but I think I'd like to retract that. I think that it will still, in the end, the broker will be America. Because as long as they're not on board, it perhaps won't count a resolution between. I think the Palestinians would need American assurances. And I think the Israelis would need American assurances.
Mm-hmm. And in that sense, do you see that there is that the clock is ticking? Of course, we have in more or less a year time elections for the president of the United States. Do you see in that sense that the clock might be ticking for peace process between Israel and Palestine before a new administration comes into the White House?
I think foreign policy is an important card that American presidents or candidates can use before elections. That's true. And it was not looking very good for President Biden because the Ukraine war is still going on and the Ukraine counteroffensive did not actually achieve that much. In fact, quite little from what I've learned. And that conflict is going to go on. So, that was not a victory for an American president going into elections. Now he has an opportunity to show himself as a strong American president, which he is doing right now. And this could be electorally beneficial for him. But I don't think his electoral success depends on a peace, on peace between Israel and Palestine, on a resolution of the conflict, but much more on how he handles the war, the clashes. Let's not call it clashes. The war right now. How he is in a way has to, because of pro-Israeli population in the U.S. He has to be supportive of Israel. He is doing that. But in the end, he also has to crack a balance. He has to find a balance on the Palestinian issue, which I think very slowly they're trying to achieve, in the sense, when they're talking about humanitarian corridors or safe spaces for people of Gaza. They're not asking Israel to not bomb Gaza. They're just saying that restrain yourself and make sure that, civilians have somewhere safe to be. So this will electorally boost his popularity, Biden's.